Hi everyone, I'm Luke Hector and you're watching The Broken Meeple. This is a YouTube channel about board games where I give reviews, top 10s and my honest opinions, regardless of the consequences. We'll get on with the show in just a minute, but first a quick word from my sponsor. As a fellow gamer, you'll understand this is unacceptable. The solution? Head down to my new sponsor, Kiender.co.uk. Kiender stocks many of the hot new releases as well as some old hidden gems. Free delivery on orders over £30, further discounts on bulk purchases, and even 5% of your spending refunded back to you as points to be used for further discounts down the line. If you use the referral link in the description below and sign up for a new account, you'll get 5% discount on your first order over £60. So let's make gaps in your collection a thing of the past. Get down to Kiender and start saving today. Thank you for listening and enjoy the rest of the video.
Get on with it.
So today we're taking a look at Uwe Rosenberg's new hit to come out of Essen, Atiwa, and I'm calling it Atiwa. I'm pronouncing it Atiwa because I googled how to pronounce it and that is what it came out with. So if that is not the correct way to pronounce it, then blame Google, not me. But this is a medium weight game from Uwe Rosenberg, so we're not talking his huge, like massive fares here. This is what they call advanced level, which confused me to high heaven at first because I thought, well hang on a minute, advanced? Surely that's heavy then. No, apparently Lookout Games do advanced for midweight and expert for heavyweight. So this is classified as a midweight Euro. Much like most of Uwe Rosenberg's fare, you are doing some aspect of farming, because why not? You're also doing some aspect of feature people, because it's Uwe Rosenberg, and I swear as a kid he was starved of food. Because it's the only reason I can think of why every one of his games has to be obsessed with feeding your people. But what you're essentially doing is, this is Atiwa in Ghana, and each of you has a player board with a lot of different pieces on it, it must be said. I mean, you've got goats, you've got trees, you've got villagers, you've got wild animals, and you've got fruit. All sorts of things on this tree. But what you're essentially doing is worker placement. So everybody has 3 workers, and on there is a communal board where you can go for actions. And these actions will get you the various resources off your board. So essentially, this entire board here is filled up with all those pieces that I just had there. And so what happens is, effectively, let's say I've got a couple of like goats here, for example. I go onto this space, it gets me a villager and a goat. So I basically go, right, I'll take this villager off and I'll take this goat off. The idea being that as you take more pieces off your player board, you reveal more icons for victory points, but also potential income that you will earn at the end of every round. But where do all these pieces go? Well, they go on these cards. So you have a few specific cards, such as farmsteads, settlements, villages, and towns, which essentially are big settlement areas where you can get different places to put your villagers. But there is also a bunch of terrain cards. So these cards, they're all basically 9 squares, and they contain storage spaces for the trees, the goats, the wild animals, fruit, bats as well. And bats? What bats? Well, bats like this thing. This mutant ManBearBat, as I like to call it. It's like, what is this cover? This cover is like, what? But we're talking this little chappy, this lovely little plushy chappy, lovely little batty friend, the fruit bat.
Take that, you winged spawn of Satan!
They've got a bunch of these markers for themselves, and as well as all the other resources that you get, you can also get fruit bats, which enable you to get more trees, but you have to give them fruit because they effectively go off into the night, they eat the fruit, but then they excrete the seeds, which make trees. That's the thematic reasoning for it anyway, but it's essentially a micromanagement puzzle. So you are constantly, every round for 7 rounds, going on 3 different spaces. Of course, everybody wants these spaces. You're micromanaging the resources off your board, so it's like, well, okay, I've managed to get a bunch of wild animals and trees, but then that's going to generate me this much fruit, this many bats. You know, have I got too much? Can I afford to feed my people at the end of a round? I'm not sure. And you do this through 7 rounds as these little action spaces slide across and sort of chop and change. And once you get to the end of 7 rounds, you total up the victory points from all your revealed income tracks, how many bats you've got, and any gold that you've managed to collect from your people. And of course, the one with the most points.
Of course!
So for aesthetics and components, the Lookout Games don't tend to do the best on this regard. I mean, the cover is not exactly the most enticing cover in the world. I mean, it's, like I said, mutant ManBearBat or whatever. It's certainly going to turn a couple of heads, but the title and the cover just being a faded out picture of the map of Ghana is not exactly screaming out like, "Ooh, buy me or take me off the shelf." Literally, if it didn't have Uwe Rosenberg's name on it, I'm pretty sure most people would just pass it by. As for the rest of the aesthetics there, fine. I mean, the board is colourful and the graphic design is easy to read. That's a plus point. Your boards are semi-easy to read. There is a bit of a weird rules clarification where it tells you that the number by the icon tells you how much of that you earn, but then there's an icon pictured with a 0 in the first bit, and it's like, well, why'd you put an icon there? Why'd you just not put the icon? It's kind of weird, and that has thrown us off in a couple of games where we've had too much tree income without realizing it, but other than a couple of blemishes, the graphic design is pretty straightforward to figure out. But you do get a bunch of other wooden pieces. I mean, you've got these, I suppose they're goats. It's not entirely evident that they're goats. Wild animals, which I'm not even entirely certain what this wild animal is meant to be. I mean, they literally just called it generic wild animal. But it's quite fun having these little bat tokens here, which kind of look like the bats with their wings. I swear you could actually have this as like a Batman transition. It would work just as well. Yeah, the artwork on the terrain cards is a little bit better though. You've got some nice trees and, you know, again, easy to read the graphic design, easy to tell what's what. But yeah, the aesthetics in here are fine. They're passable, but there's nothing to write home about. Now, for a game that's advanced, there's not a lot of rules overhead in this game. The rulebook is not particularly big, and a lot of that is down to solo challenges and, you know, a bit of the setup. But honestly, the setup looks daunting, but it's really not that involved. But the rest of the rules, even though there's a lot of text and maybe a bit too much text, the rules to this game, if you've played these sort of Euros, will come to you very quickly. A lot of it is kind of rinse, repeat. Like, if you take this off this board, it goes on one of these spaces. If you take one of these off the board, it goes on one of these spaces. And it's like, it's kind of intuitive. It's pretty easy to figure out. I learnt this from the book and played a solo game of this in next to no time, and yeah, it really didn't take me long to get used to it. Now, if somebody is not used to an Uwe Rosenberg game, they might struggle a little bit more with the overhead, but honestly, apart from a couple of those minor things like that income track I mentioned and the way that a certain action works about putting bats in unoccupied houses, that takes a couple of times to read and that, but other than that, the rules are fairly straightforward for an advanced level game, and I was quite impressed by that. And certainly the game plays very smoothly. It feels pretty elegant, you know, it doesn't feel like it's grinding its gears at any point. Even when you look at your reference sheets, which, oh my god, a game with reference cards per player! Well done, Lookout Games, somebody's listening to me. But you've got your little, like, you've got feeding charts, you've got the maintenance phase, like, order, you've got the round overview, you've got the work phase, like sending your bats out into the night action, you've got the breeding costs for in the future. Yeah, they come on 3 separate little mini cards, but you know what? Big whoop. I'm glad to have them in the game, so I'll give you a plus point for that. But even when you look at the maintenance phase and say, oh my god, 7 phases to this thing? Oh man, but when you read it, it's like, oh yeah, income, get this, get your fruit bats back, feed your people, breed animals, get your workers back, prepare for the next round. Easy. I mean, it's a fairly straightforward, smooth game in terms of playing it. The real test of your complexity in this one is that storage mechanism. Whoa, okay. You know, going like, oh yeah, this part is easy. It's like, right, I'll put my worker here, I'll get some gold. I'll put it here, I'll get a tree. Here, I'll get a goat. Micromanaging your income tracks, though, and getting the storage right is the real crux of this game, and this is where the game shines, because this is the most fun part. You have these tiles in front of you, and they've got different configurations. So, you know, I find one here that's mostly bats and trees. And this one only does fruit and trees. This one does a bit of everything. This one's got a bunch of blank spaces and a lot of goat spaces. There's one in here that's nothing but trees. It's an entire forest. And then there's a bat cave in here, which is nothing but bats. There's all sorts of different ones you can find, but no matter which one you buy, much like games like Tiny Towns and that I've reviewed in the past, you will regret every decision you make. Because you will put these cards out and you'll be like, ooh, okay, I've got these 3. Right, let's see, I can put a goat here, got that goat, right, fine. Wild animal, where? Oh, I haven't got enough space for one. Oh no, I can put one here, that's fine. Oh, I'm going to get my bats back now. 1, 2, 3. Oh, I'm going to get 3 more. Oh, wait, where am I supposed to put them? Ah! You'll constantly be regretting all the decisions you made about how you store your animals and where you get them off. And it's not even just the case of, oh, I can fit them on these tiles. You need to micromanage this as well, because if you spend a resource, it goes back to the board, whereas when it comes off your board, it goes onto the tiles. And you'll look at these income tracks that you get at the end of each round and be like, right, I'm going to get 2 trees at the end of this, which means I'm going to get 4 fruit. Well, that means I'll get 2 bats. Do I even have room to put 2 bats on my tiles? I'm not entirely sure. But now I've got to feed a load of people. But if I eat a goat, that's not too bad. But then I'll have feeding problems next round. But you could be in a situation where you go, right, well, I'm going to get 3 trees worth of income. Oh, I don't even have 3 trees. You know, you actually find you earn more than you have. So there's a lot of occasions where you'll not write yourself into a corner, but you'll go, oh, that wasn't as efficient as it could have been, my bad. And it's not the game punishing you, you're doing it yourself. Because you know what your income track's going to be, you can see what it will be at any point, you know what worker spaces you're going for, you can see that at any point. There's no luck of the draw when it comes to your micromanagement of your board. The only luck of the draw in this game, frankly, is what terrain cards come out in the game. That's it. These cards that you normally have at the bottom for your settlements and villages, they're not here at the moment, but there's spaces for them, they're fixed. You know they're there and you know how to get them, so go ahead. These ones are random each round, but there's 4 of them. You can mitigate it. You should be able to find something out of the 4 you like, and you're not going to get one every single round. So that's literally the only bit of luck, bar one little weird part. The pollution bag. This is pretty minor as a blemish, but the idea that you reach into this bag and pull out random gold, bear in mind gold is victory points, and you know, a typical score might fetch you up 100 points or so. You know, getting 100th of your score randomly is not too bad, but there's a couple in here that have got 2 gold on them. Usually it's 0 or 1, and I mean, drawing a lot of zeros is going to be painful compared to getting a bunch of 1s, but why include a couple in here that have got 2 on them? It just seems a little bit weird, but it's a minor blemish, you know, that doesn't really swing the game in any particular major way, and nor do the cards. So if you want a fairly luckless Uwe Rosenberg game, you're in, no pun intended, you're in luck here. The theme of the game is there if you're willing to look into the background of the area we're talking about, Atiwa and Ghana. It's not that it necessarily comes through in a ton of the mechanics, other than the bats. The bats with the sending them off into the night and coming back and dropping seeds is actually pretty thematic, but mostly it's a case of whether you read this little booklet or not, which, much like a lot of his games, has a little bit of history of Ghana and the Atiwa rainforest and the inspiration and how it goes into the game. So there's definitely some effort that has gone into making the theme of this game work, but you'll probably be too tied up in trying to micromanage the storage mechanism to actually remember there's a theme in the game. But that's it, it's definitely a lot better than most Euros I've played lately in that respect. Now, I mentioned solo earlier, so you're thinking, oh, multiplayer and solo, what's it like? Solo is pretty much 99% identical to the multiplayer, hence I'm not doing a separate video for it. I kid you not, this is all the solo mode is. So here's the multiplayer, okay, so there's the board, cool, multiplayer. Solo. It's the same thing. It's pretty much the same game. There's just one key difference. You have your 3 workers that you'll put out, and in the first round you'll choose the red workers as per this little chart here. So you'll go, right, well in the first round I'm going to go 1 and 2 and 3. And I'm going to do those 3 things. Then the meeples stay on the board. And when you move to round 2, you then have to collect the yellow meeples and put those on the board. And they stay there. Third round, you then take the blue meeples and put them on the board, and then eventually you'll pick up the red meeples and put them elsewhere. So you might recognize this as the Feast of Odin solo mode, where it's not that there's an AI that you're going up against, it's the fact that the spaces that you choose get blocked up in subsequent rounds so that you can't spam them over and over again. You have to diversify. I really like that because it's easy to pilot, but that's essentially all the solo mode is. You set it up for a 2-player game and you simply follow that rule with regards to which workers you pick off. Other than that, the game is pretty much identical and very quick. It's very quick to get a game solo, 7 rounds, that's all it is, with a little bit of a thinky puzzle here and there, but there's not too much to think about. Yeah, you're micromanaging your storage and hoping to get it right, but it's not like you're going to be sat there for 10 minutes a turn going, oh, what's the best way to do this then? I don't know. The sad fact though is that it is essentially beat your own score. There are some solo challenges on the back, you know, try and do this, but that's about it. And let's face it, I don't know, solo challenges are okay, but I would kind of like a little bit more than that in my solo mode. But as I say, you can play this game very quickly in that mode with barely any extra rules overhead at all. If anything, it's negligible. To be honest, I learnt the game solo and it was perfectly fine for me to play multiplayer afterwards. So it's a great way to get into this game before you gotta teach it to your buddies.
This is why Superman works alone.
But here's the big problem this game has, because as much as I say the solo mode works great, this is a game I'm actually telling you to get if you have 4 of you. Yeah, for once I'm telling you to get the most players that you possibly can for this game, because the player scaling in this is horrible. It's crap. It is so bad. Yeah, this is one of the worst examples of player scaling I've seen for a Euro game, because all that changes between 2, 3, and 4 players is that. This bit doesn't change at all. Just this. These are a few extra action spaces which are based on spending gold and how many terrain cards you've got. That's it. Little number of people at the bed tells you which you have. So you have 2 player, 4 player, and 3 player. Literally, there's what's the difference here? 5 to 8. Okay, so there's 5 spaces on a 3 player, there's 8 spaces on a 4 player, there's 2 spaces on a 2 player. And you might think, well, that scales pretty well, doesn't it? Yeah, but most of these actions you don't even go for. You'll go for these top ones with the terrain tiles pretty often, but the ones where you spend gold to to train families or get more families, not often do people use those. So those spaces aren't really contested. Whereas the top ones, a couple of them are contested, sure, but they're in every single player count, so what does it matter? So the problem is that this doesn't scale. And that's an issue because there's a lot of spaces on here. Granted, some of them are variations of the same action, but if you have 4 of you, this game gets very contested. And you're there going, you only have 3 workers, you don't get any extra. You're there like, oh, don't take my space, don't take my space, oh! You know, or you're like thinking, come on, need the goats. Don't take the goat space, don't take the goat space, cut the goat space. Phew, and that is continuous in a 4-player game. And it's great, because it makes the worker placement tight. In 3-player though, sometimes it's tight, but a few times, and like half and half. 50% it's tight, 50% it's a little bit freeform. You know, there's nothing, you're not really worried too much about getting blocked if you know that your 2 other opponents aren't really going for what you're after. In 2 players, there is just too much space on this board. I mean, you have more tightness for worker placement spots in solo mode than you do in 2 players. It's kind of insane. So, you know, 6 meeples for 4, add 6, add 7, add 5. You know, there's a lot of, add, you know, the 2 that you get from this board or something. There's a lot of spaces to distribute 6 meeples on. So 2 player is too freeform. There's just no contesting for the spaces. And yes, you'll still enjoy this puzzle, but you might as well not even have worker placement spots. You might as well just say, well, you know what, I'm just going to do these 3 actions. You're going to do 3 different ones? Okay, fine, I'll just do my own board thing then. So 2-player feels really lackluster, which doesn't bother me too much because I don't often play these sort of games 2-player. But for some of you that are thinking, oh, I'm going to buy this for me and my spouse, might not recommend you doing that, honestly. Four-player, that's great. And the game doesn't take much longer with that. The game should not set you back more than a couple of hours. Possibly even including the teach, but 2.25 hours including the teach. Because it doesn't take long to teach this game, but it also doesn't take long to play it. 2 hours is a good length. It's mid-weight Euro length. If it went on to 2.5 to 3 hours, I would probably say this game isn't worth it, especially at certain player counts. But for 2 hours, which is the typical time frame you should be able to get this game done in, that's pretty good going, actually. And you might even be able to get it as fast as 90 minutes with only 2 of you or 3 of you, perhaps. 90 minutes with 4 players is probably wishful thinking, but, you know, 2 hours is still a good length. And does it quote that on the box? Could it be correct? 30 minutes per player. It is. It got it correct. Well done.
Isn't that lovely?
Scores can be pretty tight in this game as well. I actually, for a little bit, thought, maybe there's a bit too much of an emphasis on getting the bats, because if you really munchkin bats, you can win the game pretty easily by having a bucket load of bats to score. But then there's also the incentive to get a bunch of the terrain tiles and go for a lot of gold farming. That can score you pretty highly as well. But most of the games I've had pretty close scores. We're talking 10-point gap between first and last place in 4 players. Games of this have had like 2 points between players before. One of them even finished on a tiebreaker. The game is quite balanced in respect of endgame scores, even if it doesn't feel that way to begin with. But it does feel like the majority of your points are coming from the gold and the bats, because they're the 2 biggest ways you score in this game, frankly. You don't get many points for the terrain tiles, and even though it's like, oh, I get like 13 points for this tile and 9 points for this tile, fantastic. Yeah, but you're spending 10 gold, 7 gold, 4 gold, you know, you're spending gold for this. 1 gold is a victory point. So I'm spending 10 points to get a 13-point card. It's not quite as lucrative as you might think. Bats, after 10 bats, you're scoring a point per bat. And trust me, if you focus on bats, you can get a lot of those things. And gold, if you mine gold, then gold is victory points. Victory point, victory point, victory points. You might think, well, what about families? You know, they're worth a lot of points on this board. Yeah, but it's hard to get a lot of those out without, like, crippling yourself in the food economy. And the rest of the points on this track are basically mediocre. I mean, you can get 2 points if you get all your wild animals out. Whoopee! 2 out of 100 plus. That's not exactly worth it. Wild animals are basically just tree income and food. There is nothing else for them. Fruit, I can get a ton of fruit out. Gets me 3 bats a turn. Also only gets me 3 points. The trees gets me a maximum of 6 if I can get them all out. The goats, a point each, but they'll cap at 7. It's nice to get a few points from these, but you're basically just going to equal out with other players, and so some of the points on this board just feel kind of inconsequential. The families obviously make a big difference, but the rest of the tracks, whatever. They might make a difference of 2 or 3 points here. And I know I've said that there's tight scoring, but you can't really tell whether this was the catalyst for that. This is kind of just some extra points. So Atiwa for me is a really solid midweight Uwe Rosenberg game. I mean, in this category, we're talking Newsford, we're talking Hallertau, and we're talking Atiwa. I think they're the 3 main midweight Euro games that, in terms of farming themes, that Uwe Rosenberg has done. I'm not the biggest fan of Newsfjord, so not really going to give that one much props. And I didn't particularly like Hallertau either because of the swingy nature of those cards. This one, though, is a really solid game, and it's easily my favourite of those 3, and probably one of my more favourite Uwe Rosenberg games I've played in a while. But this doesn't hold a candle to something like Caverna or Fields of Arle. You know, I don't know, do I prefer this to Feast of Odin? Maybe. I mean, Feast of Odin, I like. It's at the bottom end of my top 100, but it's a big game. It's hard to get it to the table. It's got a massive teach, massive table hog. This one is quick to play, quick to teach, and quick to get going. And you know what? This might potentially supplant Feast of Odin for me, but they are heavy games. This is a midweight one. So some people might think it's too light. Trust me, it's not too light. There's enough rules, and this storage mechanism, which is the most fun part of the game, is going to burn your brain cells a bit because you're going to constantly regret the decisions you make with whatever you're storing. But I think this is solid. You know, could the production be a little bit better? Maybe. But the biggest hurt that's in front of it is that player scaling issue. I mean, this is one that you play at 4 players or solo. 3 if you must, 2 never. It just really drops down in ratings when you play it anything other than 4 and solo. But yeah, for a Euro game to be best at 4, that's saying something. Atiwa for me gets a solid 8 out of 10. It's great. I think it's a great game, but it's those player scaling issues really do drop it out of that distinction level section. Not to mention that, you know, you're kind of doing the same thing for a lot of players, and I wish that maybe some of the point scoring in places was a bit more consequential than it actually is. But I like the tenseness of the worker placement, I like the cards you get, I like all the pieces you've got to juggle with, and all the millions of bats and that, and the fact that some care was taken to make this a relatively, you know, cool game tied to an interesting theme. So 8 out of 10, seal of endorsement. I recommend this one if you are a fan of Uwe Rosenberg games, or if you like farming themes in general, this one will be another solid hit for you. So that's it for me on this review. I'll see you on the next Broken Meeple video. Remember, to help me with the algorithm, I need you to please thumb up the video, thumb it up on Board Game Geek as well, share it on social media, but most of all, get your comments down below. What do you think of Uwe Rosenberg farming games? Does this one catch your eye? Do you know anything more about the history setting of this? Do you think this is going to be better than those midweight ones I mentioned? Possibly even better than some of those heavyweight ones I mentioned? Where is it going to rank for you? Have you played it? Where does it rank for you as well? Let me know your thoughts. It helps with the algorithm, but also I enjoy reading and responding to them all. So until next time, take care, and if you want to check out more content on the Broken Meeple, I've done more reviews of games from Essen, including Tribes of the Wind and Splendor Duel. Plenty more reviews from Essen games to come soon, but this one was a pretty solid hit, and I got the little plushie bat for it as well. Not included in the box. Take care, and remember as always, whether you've got your own little cute little bat or not, it's still only a game. Bye for now.